It's the first building that was put there, I believe. It's the place where people came when they established the city of Los Angeles. They came there first. Jedediah Smith, who crossed overland, first American to cross overland, stopped there at the mission. It's just such a fabulous place in Southern California and American history. But in addition to the subject of the mission, there is also the play that was designed in early years, and we'll hear all about the history of it. Because to hear something about a historical place from a viewpoint of it being a play or something done to entertain, I think is an interesting part of history that is captivating. And so tonight we have the opportunity to hear about this mission, a play from our own member, Paul Spitzzeri, who was a former sheriff. He has been a longtime member. He has also written a number of things. He's the director at the Workman Temple Museum. He has a blog. He is a historian, and he's a great guy. So I'd like you to welcome with me Paul Spitzzeri.
Boy, Joe, when you said main course, I thought I'm going to have a fillet of history with a side of myth information. That's what I think we'll do tonight. It's great seeing people I haven't seen in a long time. Donna Harris and I go back 25 years, the California Council for the Promotion of History, no longer with us, we think. Betty Uyeda as well. John Cahoon. John was very helpful many times when I went to go research at the Seaver Center. I think a lot of us can say that. So great to see you guys here. And then meeting Leanne at the Huntington Corral on Saturday was fantastic as well. When I was there, I dedicated my talk to Eric Nelson because right after that, Daniel and I headed over to his house. We saw the Turners and the Selmers out there. When I filled in at the last minute to do a talk here way back in 1999, last millennium, last century, the first person to walk up to me when I came through those doors was Eric. And it greeted me and introduced himself and got me to meet other people. And that was a pretty important thing. So I want to remember Eric for all he did for the Westerners. I remember one time we had to take this partition down because he had 120 people show up for his talk. So that was pretty phenomenal. All right, so we're talking about something involving romance. Speaking of Valentine's Day, there are different kinds of romance, I guess. At Old San Gabriel, the mission play, which existed for about 20 straight years and a few additions after that. So I'm looking for the remote. Was that on the table over there?
John. Down.
There we go, awesome. Okay, so San Gabriel is called the Queen of the Missions of the 21. It was a pretty successful mission for part of the people who were there, which would be the missionaries, maybe not so much for the indigenous folks. This is how the church looked in the 1870s. What's kind of cool is you can see the railroad track for the Southern Pacific coming through the board fence here, so an indication of changing times and all that. This is a good 40 years after secularization, when the missions were closed down and the churches converted into parish churches. So the history of it has been written by the people who have control of the narrative. We don't really know much from the indigenous side, although there are descendants, people that are around, who do talk about that. And I think a lot of us have heard the controversies about the Father Sarah statue and all those kinds of things. So the mission play has got a part to play in that. Now the mission didn't start where it is. In 1771, it was founded along the Rio Hondo, the old San Gabriel River, and the Whittier Narrows. They thought that was a good spot, and it probably sounded like a good spot in the summer. Right? And then when a flood hit, they had to move. And they found higher, drier ground in its current location. Now, I run this museum, the Workman Temple Family Homestead, and Walter P. Temple, who owned that place in the late teens to the early 30s, put up a marker to mark the site of the mission. In the background, you see a fence. Behind that was the oil property he owned at that time. That's why the marker's there. Not because the mission was there, but because he owned that property. So it's kind of hard to imagine a mission built on a hillside. So if you ever go there and you stand, this is a corner of San Gabriel Boulevard and Lincoln Avenue in Montebello. If you stand looking at that plaque like this, you have to turn around and look across San Gabriel Boulevard, and you'll get the idea of where the mission was. He did this in 1921, and by then the mission play was about a decade in existence. But he had more of an interest in San Gabriel than just that. He purchased the entire block of property across from the San Gabriel mission in the early 1920s and built 4 buildings there. Well, built 3 and then donated what became the City Hall. So here's some shots of those structures. So if you're in San Gabriel and you go to the mission and you look across Mission Drive, those are the structures that he built there in the 1920s, including the post office. Notice his son, if you can see that, wearing a sombrero and a chalo suit because they love to dress up and kind of indulge in the romance at the mission play and fiestas and that sort of thing. And you can stand by that window if you want to. I dare you to put on a chalo suit and a sombrero and do that. And then, like I said, he donated the site for the current City Hall out there. So he was very interested in the mission and mission history, and not surprisingly, a big supporter of the mission play. He and Henry Huntington purchased the largest amounts of stock in the playhouse that was finished in 1927. Huntington could afford it. I'm not sure the temple could have when he did that, but anyway. This is how far these guys went to indulge themselves in the romance of their history. If you go to our museum and walk through La Casa Nueva, in the living room, there's a photograph on the mantle of the 2 oldest children, and there are stained glass windows of them in the house. So they're kind of parading themselves in the old romantic tradition. Even though their father started a town called Temple City, which on the back of the brochure said, only white people reside here. White people of a desirable class. Not sure what that means. No mobile homes, maybe. Now, San Gabriel in the early 20th century was a small little town, about 1,000 people. That's Mission Drive. So it's kind of a little hamlet. Nothing had changed much there over the course of several decades, but that's going to change pretty quickly. And there are a number of reasons why that is. One of them is the growth of tourism. Another is that you get a streetcar line that comes through, courtesy of Henry Huntington and the PE, Pacific Electric. And then, of course, the mission play. Tourists did come out on occasion. This is 1896, a photograph, ruins of San Gabriel. That is an octagonal-shaped adobe building, which is pretty interesting. There were actually 2 of those that I know of, one in downtown Los Angeles. The guy who owned that was William Monet, spelled M-O-N-E-Y. William Monet was a, how do you describe him?
Count the money.
A clergyman, a pseudo-scientific thinker, a philosopher par excellence, and he lived in that dwelling. It is for sale, though. If you want to buy it for $25 and do a little rehab, you keep one wall, you don't have to worry about the permitting. But here's what it's at for the tourism, is once these streetcars start to come in, it's really going to enhance the community's sense of its history. And I say sense because, of course, a lot of this is romanticized. So there you can see behind the folks the building where the clerics lived and worked. There is your belfry. You might know the story of the belfry. Lucky Baldwin showed up one day with one of the bells and presented it back to the mission. And he said, how'd you get that? Well, one of my guys was driving by on the horse and cart, and the bell just fell into the back of the cart. But I thought I'd return it to you, and I love that story. And as a tourist, you could go to San Gabriel and do this. You could dress up like a caballero. You could put a headband. What kind of California Indians had headbands? Anybody?
Hollywood tribe.
The Hollywood tribe. Yeah, that's right. The HO/LLY/. Exactly. Yeah, and you could do this. Get dressed up. There was a Chief Manito who would be photographing with the tourists too, and it's kind of unclear what his background actually was. Ramona's home. One of how many? 15, 20? George Washington slept in many places. Ramona evidently did too. Well, we don't know for sure, Brian, what that really means, but and where Alessandro was during that whole time. The old grapevine. That was another big thing, and the grapevine's still over there. But this is the idea of what you're trying to sell to people as they go to the San Gabriel mission. How much of it's factual, how much of it is mythical, that's an interesting question. Now we get to John Stephen McGroarty. McGroarty was born in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, so we're talking to somebody from Pittsburgh, same state. And he grew up there. He wound up being the county treasurer of his county. He was a lawyer for a while. And then he went west because of health problems, which is a common thing. How many people with TB came out here to California, for example? McGroarty wound up working at the Anaconda Mining Company, which was a pretty big firm doing the copper stuff out there in Montana. Then he migrated down to Los Angeles in 1901. Same year as Henry Huntington. It's the dawn of the 20th century. There's a new boom going on. It's a good time for him to come out here. He was a journalist, had always had that interest, so he joined the Los Angeles Times. Wrote many articles. One of them was February 12th, 1909. Whose birthday is February 12th?
Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln. It was a special section about Black Los Angeles, multiple pages. McGroarty wrote a really remarkable statement or essay about that. And he was really beloved by the Black community in Los Angeles for a long time because of doing that. And that set him apart from probably most people who were out here. Later he became editor of the West Coast magazine, which some of you may have come across. And so he did quite a bit of different journalistic activities. Later in life, he was the poet laureate of California in the 1930s until his death in 1944. Served 2 terms in the House of Representatives. How does a poet get to be in Congress? That's kind of crazy, right? He bought an area in Tujunga and established a home that is now the McGroarty Art Center. So that may be the one thing people would recognize his name for. Now, in the bottom right is an interesting statement written by somebody who saw the mission play. And what she says is, I believe the highest gift given by God to be that of histrionic ability. Now, histrionic is meaning different things, like hysterical, right? But I think she means somebody who can write history really well. I like that, those of us who are historians. The greatest gift from God is to be histrionic. He takes Mr. McGroarty's hand with a pen in it, and he guides it as we guide a child's hand who is learning to write. So God held his hand when he wrote the mission play. Then by the mystery of his domination, he puts into the actor, Benjamin Horning, who played Father Junipero Serra, into his heart the conception of Father's life, and out of an artistic soul carried along the chords of speech, etc., etc. Oh boy, speak of histrionic, that's pretty good. When the Los Angeles Tribune covered McGroarty's new play in 1912, they wrote some interesting things. The description of what he wrought should stir the imagination of every Californian. For there are in it the possibilities of a new fame for this state. So you see what's working here? Tourism, right? And getting the attention now. Wherever romance and art sway people. I didn't see history there. No. I saw romance and art. The story of the Spanish padres who brought Christian civilization to this Western empire. Wait, whose Western empire? Isn't that later?
No,
it's all together. See, the Spanish were just there temporarily until we could establish our Western empire. By the way, a big influence was a guy named Frank Miller. Some of you might know that name. He founded the Mission Inn. Speaking of romantic and historically accurate, speaking of histrionic architecture, there you go. And at the bottom, we expect to see the mission play become a magnet for the world and to have an increasing pride in the fact that it sprang from the brain of a fellow townsman. You can't get much better than that. So 1912 was the first season. I don't know why his own Mission Play Association that he founded and led misspelled his first name as James Stephen McGroarty, but never mind. And look at this here, the first great dramatic representation of the dawn of civilization in southwestern America, and a pageant of the rise and fall of the Franciscan missions, at once historic and impressive. I'd like to know what's historic and not impressive. There's a lot of that probably, right? Comparable only in the world-famous passion play at Oberammergau, which is in Germany, very well known. This thing got compared to Oberammergau all the time. Really amazing stuff. 300 persons and etc. So from the get-go, they're really pushing this thing as something special. This is a rough rendering of what the original Mission Playhouse looked like. They rushed it through to completion in 1912, and later on, as we'll talk about, they'll build a fancier one. This is the outside of that Mission Play building. So it's kind of in the same vicinity as Ramona's home and the grapevine and all that stuff. So it's designed to be part of this whole pseudo-historical situation they're setting up. Early press, Indians and mission play real, says producer. Speculation over authenticity of dusky actors. Boy, the terminology that they use that you wouldn't use today, right? Now, when they say Indians and mission play real, there were Indians who were real, but where did they come from? And we'll talk about one particular example a little later on. But again, the ads here, dramatic and picturesque, reincarnation of Francisco Romance. Is that his name, Francisco Romance? They meant Franciscan Romance, and glory, and all of that. So Willard Huntington Wright is a really interesting figure. This came out in the 1912, I think March 1912 issue of West Coast Magazine. Who's the editor of West Coast Magazine?
Surprise.
John Stephen McGroarty. He's not going to write his own article praising himself, so he's going to have Willard Wright do this. Willard Wright came to Los Angeles several years before. He was in his 20s. He became a critic for the Los Angeles Times, art and so forth. And then he moved to New York City, became kind of well known as an art critic, had a nervous breakdown, which is code for I'm an alcoholic / drug addict, which is what he was. And then once he got over that, in the 1920s, he reinvented himself under another name and wrote very, very popular mystery stories with the character Philo Vance as a detective. Some of you may have heard of all of this. Wright was a fascinating character. And he writes this American Omer Argyle, and he goes into great purple prose all through. I would share more with you, but we don't have time for that. But he talks about the fact that there is this idea of what pageants are supposed to do. The historical pageant is a mirror held up to an actual or an imaginary past. Like, wait, which one? Maybe it could be both, though. Like, you can walk and chew gum at the same time with this kind of stuff, right? Pageants are panoramas of vanished splendors thrown against the background of the present. And he goes on and on. This one's really interesting. The elements of the pageant, whether documentary or legendary, are to be found only in the racial imagination. What does that mean?
Of the wrong race.
Well, which race is controlling the narrative, right? That's part of that too. But he's very clear. The first element of a pageant is romance. You've got to have that first. And Joe, you were kind of talking about that in a good way, which is to have a story behind the history to catch the attention. And he just goes on and on. He says that the United States really doesn't have a past. We have no historical background. This is 1912. We have no past in the United States. Our racial beginnings are too near us to be invested with the atmosphere of romance. We're a nation of pioneers. He goes on and on and on. Nation of pioneers and all that. But who are the pioneers, right? That's kind of the question.
Wales.
No, in the Tidings, which is the Roman Catholic newspaper of that time, they talk about this too. And they're talking about John Stephen McGroarty, the gentle poet, the faithful historian, and the gifted playwright. This pageant adheres absolutely to the truth in the historical pictures which it presents, and is as truly religious as the Passion Play. So they're not really saying the romance is all that important here, that this is real stuff. And of course the Catholic Church is going to be invested in that kind of thinking, right? It's basically their story. Interestingly though, one of the main characters in the early years, who played Senora Josefa, main character in Act 3, is Lucrecia del Valle, who came from a very prominent family. Her father, Reginaldo, was a politician and a business figure, and her ancestors owned the Rancho Calbulos. Where did Helen Hunt Jackson write a lot of her book Ramona in the 1880s? Rancho Calbulos. So this is an interesting dynamic of all of this. Lucrecia was a stage actor of some renown and ability. She did that for a number of years as a young woman. She married and gave up the stage, but she later became a major figure in the Democratic Party. She was vice chair of the Democratic National Committee at one time. She was a delegate, I think, at 4 or 5 national conventions. Her husband, Henry Grady, was also politically connected, largely because of her, became an ambassador to several countries. So an interesting thing, she is a Californian, kind of scion who is being part of this play. Another great quote is that no one should miss seeing this truly historic / religious play. that so graphically depicts the trials, struggles, and spiritual triumphs of the mission padres of California. What about the indigenous people? That they were Christianizing and civilizing, they don't really get mentioned in these kinds of things. But they do say that Miss Lucrecia del Valle is a double attraction, for she is descended from the same ancestry that she depicts in the character of Senora Yorba. And readers of Ramona, misspelled, will be interested in learning that her ancestral home is the Cumulos Rancho. Another couple to mention are the principal choreographers and dancers, Juan Zoraquinos and his wife Juanita Vigore. Now they were both of mixed ancestry as well. They both had French ancestry as well as local California. And they were dancers of great renown, and they led this whole thing in terms of some of the more interesting parts of the mission play. 5 years ago, their niece called me and said, I have a lot of scrapbooks and photographs and programs, and I think we're ready to find another home for those. So we were fortunate to get gifted this material, a lot of which is in the back table if you want to see that, and will be shown in this presentation. These photographs, most of them came from that donation. Juanita had a sister, Guadalupe Vigore, who was also part of the dance troupe. Notice the other two women there as Indian figures, I'm sure historically accurate with costume and all of that. The Vigores lived, so, by the way, I forgot to mention this, we're a mile from all of this basically, right over here. The Vigores had a house just south of the mission on Santa Anita on the east side. It's still there, a landmark from the 18th century. And they resided there, so they always had these close ties to the mission. Guadalupe and Juanita's aunt was named Laura Gonzalez Temple. She was married to Walter, who I talked about before. So there's these interesting ties between some of these families. And a lot of us who do research know that the connections between California families are really intricate. All right, here's one of your main indigenous characters, William F. Harrison, Chickasaw Indian from Oklahoma. So he was indigenous, as they said in that article. It's just that he's from a whole different part of the country. And he's wearing this costume while he's supposed to be an indigenous person from the Mission Carmel, near Monterey, right? So it doesn't really matter, I guess, how accurate it has to be. Based on a true story. That's how we say that.
Or imaginary.
Or imaginary, right. Now Harrison did work in the film industry for a while. He was with Douglas Fairbanks' troupe in the teens, before he joined the play somewhere around 1920, and he was with it for about a dozen years. Look at that headdress, fantastic. In the teens, you see a number of actors playing Junipero Serra. Benjamin Horning was the first one. Later on, there are going to be true Shakespearean actors who are doing this role. R.D. McLean comes to mind. We'll see a picture of him a little bit later on. And the promotion gets more and more elaborate as time goes on. And that means that the discussion of the play gets that way as well. But just some examples of things from our collection. I want to point out the titles of these acts. Act 1, the savage sensing the approach of his white conquerors. Is that what they were thinking when the Portola expedition was wandering around not sure where to go? Because how did they get up and down California? The indigenous people helped them do that in many cases. Act 2, specter of the faded military glory of the Spanish conquest. Act 3, spirit of the ever-living faith in the cross of Christ. And that really didn't change throughout the history of this. Now, one thing I've thought a lot about with this is, what was the condition of Spain in 1769? It was a crumbling, decaying empire. It's only, 40 years away from being taken over by Napoleon. But they present this as if the Spanish are a mighty empire, bringing Christianity and civilization out here. Oh, Frederick Ward is another Shakespearean actor who played Father Serra. Now, we have a thing today called appropriation. And so the idea that, a guy from England or a guy from the United States would play Father Serra didn't bother anybody then. It might bother some people now. And I love these photographs and these programs as well. Another example. Notice Mrs. Tyrone Power. That is not the actor Tyrone Power. That is his father, Tyrone Power Sr. But she played Senora Yorba in the late teens and early 20s. Oh, what the mission play is. This is great too. A pageant drama presenting by means of both pageantry and stirring drama. They just said that, it's a pageant drama. The founding of the white man's Christianity and civilization on the western shores of America. Dr. Henry Van Dyke, preeminent among literateurs, has pronounced the mission play to be the greatest of the world's pageant dramas. Well, there you go. You got somebody to say it's great. I don't know if they paid him to do that. It's possible, right? And they go on and on with this stuff. But this little 3-paragraph version becomes multi-pages later on. This is kind of an early flyer you might see, put up on a wooden fence or on, some other part of town to promote the most unique theater in the world, largest stage and most gorgeous scenery in California, and all of that. By the 20s, you start seeing it getting fancier. Now they've got, multicolor front pages or front panels of the program. And then, of course, you got to promote the history, but also how you're going to get around and maybe make some money for the Pacific Electric while you're at it. 3 wonderful trolley trips of the PE, and you can see all of these missions. This person who had this one had visited a few of the missions, as you can see from the X's there. And, why not have the mission curio store, too? Right? You got to go shopping after you go see the play. And this is a building that Walter Temple erected across from the mission. And that's where the curio stores, the authentic materials.
Exit through the gift shop.
Exit through the gift shop on your way out, kind of like the Disneyland attraction thing, right? Exactly. So McLean, Pasha Power, she was Tyrone Power Sr.'s wife, estranged at that point. I like this one on Act 3. The act is one of lamentation and sorrow. It depicts the decay of the missions after the seizing of the mission property by the Mexican government. The brave, glad days are no more. The work of the Padres is undone, and the Indian neophytes have been driven forth to starve and to die. And then they lay out what happens with some of the romance between some of the characters as well. And there's no question that when secularization happened, the indigenous people there were basically thrown out on their own, and it was a very difficult time. But they don't talk about what happened during the mission period to those people. Like what percentage, like we see in Hawaii, died because of disease and violence and all of that. 90%, 85%, whatever it might be. Sure. They don't really get into that. And of course, the whole perspective is about the Padres and their heroism in the work that they were doing. All right, so you see things like this. The picture on the right is what it's all about. The loving father with the Indian child. And then there's the romance too. And these are some characters that have their little fling during the whole thing. This is a rare view of the interior of the Mission Playhouse, one of the programs in the 1920s, the first one. By the way, McGroarty's wife, Ida, she did a lot of the stage and costume design as well, so it was a husband and wife partnership with that. And because McGroarty's a poet, he's got to put his own poems in some of these programs too, including the King's Highway. So I want to read this at the bottom for you, the last stanza. Old conquistadores, oh brown priests and all, give us your ghosts for company when night begins to fall. There's many a road to travel, but it's this road today with the breath of God above us on the King's Highway. Ooh, pretty impressive, right? This is 1923 or thereabouts, and they're already talking about a new playhouse. And having a bigger venue to draw more people. And that's what that became in 1927. It's been called different names over the years, San Gabriel Civic Auditorium and what have you. By 1927, though, there was several problems. One is that the boom that was in the first half of the 20s, or first part of the 20s, was starting to really peter out. The other is the play's been around for 15 years, and it only had a certain audience it was going to reach. And they were already having trouble with some ticket sales by this point. And so they spent a lot of money constructing this building, but within 5 years it's going to close down, the play. But still, an amazing structure. If you haven't been in there, it really is remarkable. Just the architecture and the decor and all of that. And then off to the side you have Ramona's old residence and the grapevine and what have you. Really impressive piece of architecture. This is the LA Times talking about the opening in 1920s. Architecture typifies golden days of state. I'm not sure where you would have found something that looked exactly like that, but I guess the mission revival type of thing is what they were striving for with that. Really amazing. Some interior photographs from some of the late 1920s programs that they issued. the 3,000th performance of the play at the Playhouse. Monday night, February 17th, AD 1930. And that's a lot of performances. And they say that probably around 2 to 2.5 million people saw the Mission play during its time, and then believed that they were seeing real history. This is a 1931 program, so you get the Art Deco influence really kicking in by this point. But it was about the end of the run. Now, to go back to the Temple family, one of the Temple family had to find another home because his family lost their homestead, where our museum is, in 1932. And he moved in with his aunt in that Ortega de Rey adobe just down the street from the Mission. And this guy wound up becoming a historian of the city of San Gabriel and a historian of the Mission. He was also the first person to systematically go through the Mission records and transcribe and translate them, or the other way around, I guess it would be. Although there's been some questions over the years about his accuracy with a lot of that. Sometimes the people connect A to B when there's not really a clear path to that. And part of his role as a historian was he had some influence in getting statuary brought out in the Mission gardens. So a good example here. He and his wife, Gabriela Quiros, who was a native of the San Gabriel area, were the people who hosted the annual Pioneer Reception for almost 4 decades. The Fiesta at San Gabriel every September, they were major figures in. He helped do things like bring a commemoration of the Yuma Massacre of the 18th century. And then he lived long enough for the Mission Bicentennial in 1971. So this interplay and connection between the Temple family and the Mission play was pretty important. There were some revivals in the 1940s. 1941 on the left, 1947 on the right. I don't know how they got from the 23rd year to the 22nd year, 6 years later. That's okay. That happens. But in 2013, they did a reimagined version of this. And this is from a Catholic newspaper. And they're quoting a Father, Bruce Wellums, saying that as Catholics, the work of reconciliation is what we embrace. It is good to forgive and to acknowledge, but the majority of our energy has gone to reconciliation. So the idea behind this reimagined play was to try to get a little more balance in the representation of this. And the article goes through talking about McGroarty and how Frank Miller inspired him. They went to Mount Rubidoux. Anybody done that? You know, the Easter sunrise, and they scanned the horizon and got inspired and all of that. But the interesting thing about this article is they talk about the fact that the guy who wrote it and the producer and the director, they had people of all ethnicities play characters. And that's a really common thing now. Bridgerton, right? And so we've kind of adapted and changed in how we do these things, and I think that's fascinating. So what they say, for example, is that with Gabrielino Tongva Native Americans, Chinese, Spanish, Catholic, Protestant, and Buddhist members of the cast, that this play respectfully addresses the meeting of cultures in present-day California, and also the best and worst of their meeting in the past. Father Willem says the play speaks to how we address what is imposed on us by other people. When we take time to listen to one another, we ask what is meaningful for you. We have an obligation to assist, he says, in the preservation of indigenous culture. They had workshops in advance of the play about Native American culture. He said, we want to think more about how to recognize Native Americans in our local and state history. Now, this ran in 2013 4 times. And I don't know if they're going to bring it back. I'd like to see it happen and kind of go and check this out myself. So as I finish up, just some photographs in this donation. Fascinating. So a lot of us know the stairs to the choir loft on the south side of the Mission, along Mission Drive. This is where the dancers and musicians are posed. There is Pasha Power, her daughter, and that is the future movie star, Tyrone Power. Age 5 or something. Pretty amazing, right? The indigenous characters. So maybe a little closer to the California indigenous Indians in the feathered headdress of William F. Harrison Chickasaw. But in the background is where the Playhouse was. You can see it's a far cry from what they built in 1927. On the stage, and these are all professional photographs that were part of the scrapbooks that Juan Zonaquinos and Juanita Vigore kept and passed on to their descendants. The Spanish in the military. And of course, the thing is, if there hadn't been the missionaries and just the military, you could imagine how much worse it might have been for the indigenous people, right? So there's something to be said about the different kinds of Spanish colonization that was happening during that period. Here's a great one. I'm not sure what the guy with the suit and tie is doing there, but some of the major actors in the early days. There's William Harrison, and there's Benjamin Hornan, who played Father Sarah, all posted outside. This is a great one. Standing at the cross, and that is the interior of San Gabriel Mission, which is a lot different now, if you ever go out there. I love this one as well. All the cast and people signing a portrait of Juanita Vigoré, one of the principal dancers there. So McGroarty signs it, and major actors and what have you. Frederick Ward, Shakespearean actor. This one's fascinating. Look at the makeup, right? So that is clearly a gringo actor playing an indigenous person, and I'm assuming the kids may be as well. Or if they're not, they're being made up to look like that. Notice the little diorama back there. That was a very popular part of the experience, actually, was to walk along a grape-covered arbor and see all the missions in miniature. Artie McLean as a stern Sarah, not the loving Sarah that is kind of depicted throughout the mission play. There's your William F. Harrison again with one of the Spanish soldiers, the mission in the background. So, hope you enjoyed that, learned a little bit about the mission play, and I appreciate you listening. Thank you. Any questions, comments, concerns? Nick?
Month of 1927, what was the day?
For which one?
Opening shot.
Oh, the Mission Playhouse? What month? I'm thinking May.
Henry Huntington died in May of 27.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. I don't know if he ever saw it because he went to Philadelphia to get treated.
Yeah, and died there.
And died in Philadelphia. I don't know if he ever saw it, but yeah, he gave 50 grand towards that. Yeah.
Was there, over the years, was there any change in the script and the content of the play?
The question was there any change to the content of the script or the play? I don't know that there was. I didn't see anything that indicated that. But that would be interesting to know if he did any modifications at all. He did go to Spain several years into the play, apparently to do a little more digging, but he wrote other plays too that were produced at the theater, so that may have been that. But I don't know of any change to the content. If there was, it was probably minor, would be my guess. I don't think the main thrust of the themes would have changed that much. Yes, sir?
Ramona, the play that we see in Emmett, and this play, how would you compare the two, and where did they go take off from each other?
That's interesting, the idea of comparing the Ramona pageant with this, and Ramona pageant is not that much later, right? We went out there several years ago because my son's girlfriend's uncle was one of the major characters, and his last year after 45 years of doing it. I found it fascinating and interesting. I don't know if it was materially different, but they've rewritten that though. That's the thing though, is I know the Ramona pageants change a lot in its content. So I guess that's the question. If you go back to the early years, go ahead, please, John.
How much of the decline of the original run of the play would you attribute to the Great Depression versus audiences just getting tired of the material?
Yeah, I think Joe and I were talking about that too. Yeah, I think the Great Depression did have an impact for sure, because tourism's going to go down. But I do wonder if after 3,000 performances, like how many more people are going to do that? And changing taste too. It's like Westerns were huge at one point, and they kind of go away, then they come back, and that sort of thing. So that is a good question. But yeah, comparing is an interesting thing. I think there's some similarities to that. The Ramona pageant had more of the romance at the center of it though. Whereas this one's more about the heroism of the mission father. So to me, that might be the one big difference between those. Pete.
What's being done with the Mission Playhouse now? What sort of things going on?
You know, I haven't kept up with the status of the Mission Playhouse. Maybe somebody else here has. I know for many years it was kind of underutilized, if not utilized at all, and then they would have things come back. So maybe it's, I'm not sure, but Brad, do you have any?
Well, they have a great series of silent films.
I was recently at the Mission Playhouse seeing the silent film Robin Hood. But they're doing they have a great series of silent films there. They have a brand new, very old, so restored, beautiful organ. So they're still doing a number of things there. I don't know. I don't think they fill it up too often. But,
It's a massive venue. I know they were doing concerts at one point for quite a while too, so it's good to hear that they're doing something.
You know,
I got it.
speaking of Southern California pageants, it seems like I remember that one used to be called the La Cristianita pageant down by Laguna. Does anybody else remember that? What was the name?
La Cristianita?
La Cristianita.
In Laguna?
Cristianita.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was one of those, you know, across the hillside with horseback riding and, I think it was about the first Christian girl born in California. Maybe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it might have been, not an imitation, but inspired by things like this.
Perhaps, yeah. And
Yeah.
it was during my lifetime, so it wasn't.
Oh, within the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. Yeah. Oh. So it's pretty new. Idea. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, has anyone you know done, or you, done a deep dive into the concept of these pageant plays?
Yeah.
Like Light of Asia. They're fascinating to me, and I don't know if they're, where the scripts are. What was it about a pageant that we don't do now? I would love to see one.
Yeah, Leanne, I think part of that might be that we have an outdoor climate here too, and that may be a section of it. There was one done by Lillian Burkhart Goldsmith, who was actually Jewish, but she did Christian pageants in the 1920s also. And I think part of that is in the 20s. I just wonder, because so much was happening, it was changing, a lot of liberalization, and some people were losing their religion, but there was a movement kind of countering that. And so you think of like all the big biblical films of the time, Cecil B. DeMille stuff. I just wonder how much of that is kind of mixed into this milieu too. There's a word for you.
Was there any discussion at the time of making a film adaptation of the Mission play?
Yeah, that's a good one. Not that I know of. There were plenty of Ramona movies. I think 1910 was an early. In fact, I think Lillian Burkhart Goldsmith had something to do with a Ramona film also. But I don't know anything about the Mission play in particular. And maybe because it didn't quite have that, romance between two people. How do you carry that story in a film like that? Especially shorts, especially in those early days, because you had 2 reelers. You got 20 minutes to explain the whole story. So yeah, that's interesting to know if there would have been anything like that. Anybody else? Okay, thanks.
So, I want to thank Paul for this great talk, and we have this little memento to remind us of this wonderful moment. And I think that history and the interpretation of it is great. I can't wait to see what's going to happen in the next 50 years. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for coming. And next month, right here, we're going to have a talk by our own Paul McClure. This is very exciting. And he's going to talk about tragic heroes of Los Angeles history. And knowing Paul, this will be a great talk. So don't miss it. We'll see you here again next month. Thank you very much for coming.